Welcome back, everybody. My name is Nick. This is Swiftful Thinking. In this series, we are rebuilding popular user interfaces in SwiftUI. In this section of the playlist, we're looking at Spotify, and this is the 5th video in rebuilding the Spotify UI. So if you missed the first 4, go check those out. They're available for free in this playlist on YouTube. But this is the 5th video, and we are now wrapping up the second screen of our Spotify app. I think it's looking really good so far. I hope you guys agree as well. Please leave a comment after this video what you think of what we have built so far. Is this on par? Is this what you guys expected? Do you guys understand what we are building, and could you build it yourself? Let me know in the comments.
All right, welcome back, everybody. We are building Spotify, or at least a couple sample screens of Spotify. So here is the product that we are building. We have the home screen. We've already done the home screen so far, a couple of videos back. So if you're just joining in, probably start a couple of videos back and then work your way up to this video. We have the home screen here. We got a couple of different categories that we can click on. We have a bunch of cells here for the recents where you can click on them and go to the detail screen. In the last video, we started working on this detail screen. We have the preview working up here, as you can see on the right side of my screen. And so far, we got the top stretchy header, and we got this description cell here. But what we don't have is all of these cells at the bottom, and we don't have the back button or the navigation bar. And so we're first going to create these cells just to get the screen built out. Then we're going to add this navigation bar and then wrap up this screen. So let's get this cell going here. Again, I'm going to challenge you guys to do this yourself. It is pretty simple, but I'm going to make it a reusable cell just to keep my code nice and clean. So let's jump back into, let's go here. I'm going to put the simulator over here so you guys can see it as we build. Let's see here. Let's jump into the components. Let's right click, create a new file, a SwiftUI view. I'm going to call this one song row cell. Again, I'm doing really bad naming conventions here. We're just building. I think there's a point in SwiftUI where you build enough views that a single naming convention doesn't really work across the board. So song row cell or song row view, whatever you want to call it. And then let's get building here. So first thing we're going to do is set up the preview. Let's create a Z stack here. Give it a black background. Ignore the safe area. And let's create a V stack. And what we're going to do is just paste a bunch of these because they're going to be in a V stack on the screen. So just to kind of mimic that here, let's give this a foreground color of .red just for 1 second so we can see it on the screen. Cool. All right, I'm going to challenge you guys again if you want a little bit of challenge to build this cell yourself. And I'll give you some hints here. We're going to pass in the image size. We're going to pass in the title, the subtitle, and then we're going to pass in 2 actions. One action if you tap on the entire cell, another action if you tap on the ellipsis. So 2 actions to pass into this cell here. Go ahead and do it yourself if you want. Pause this video. I'm going to go ahead and start building it right now. All right. Firstly, let's get the data going. So we're going to pass in a image size of type CG float. I'll set it equal to 100 for now. We'll say a image name of type string. I'm going to set it equal to constants.random image. Let's do a title of type string as well. I'm just going to say some song name goes here. Let's do a subtitle of type string, and I'll set this equal to some artist name. And I'm going to make this actually optional in case there is no sub. A lot of times when I'm building reusable components, I make things optional even though they're not really optional right now, just so that I have a version in the future if I ever don't have some data. I don't have to come in and actually edit this cell. So I can make the image optional, I can make the title optional, I can make the subtitle optional. In production, I often make everything optional, but for now, I'm just going to keep this one optional. And let's pass in 2 actions. We're going to say var on cell pressed. That's just the generic action, which will be a function that returns void, meaning nothing. This will be a function, we'll make it optional and set it equal to nil. And then we're going to do one more. So let's copy and paste that, and it will be on ellipsis pressed, ellipses, ellipsis. And then let's build the cell real quick. So you can see here that we're going to have an H stack with the image, and then there's a V stack with the title and the subtitle, and then there's an ellipsis all the way on the right side here. Pretty simple cell. Create an H stack. Spacing of 8. Open up the brackets. Image loader view. Let's get our URL string in here. We'll pass in the image name. And of course, I'm going to add a frame with the image size for the height and the width. All right, beautiful. It's on the screen. On the right of that is going to be a VStack. Let's add alignment of leading, because as we're getting better at SwiftUI, we know that these alignments are going to be relevant. So let's add them in from the get-go. Spacing of 4, open up the brackets, put text on the left with the title, and then text below it with the subtitle. Subtitle is optional, so we'll do a quick if let subtitle and paste that in here. The title, let's give it a font of body. Body is like the default font anyway. We'll give it a font weight of medium, make it a little bit thicker, and a foreground style. Let's bring in that white, the Spotify white. The subtitle will make it a little bit smaller. We'll do a font of callout. We'll do a foreground style of light gray, Spotify light gray. And on the right, past this VStack here, on the right, we're going to add an image with a system name of ellipsis. Let's also give this the Spotify white that we know and love, and we're going to resize this, make it a little bit bigger, maybe a font of subheadline. Let's see here. All right, first and foremost, I want to edit the tap gesture on this image. So if I add a background color blue, you can see that the tap gesture area is super, super small. So let's add some padding of maybe 16 around it. So now that tap gesture area is a little bit better for the user. I'll add an on-tap gesture on this, and then I'll just make the color.black.opacity 0.001, just so that we can actually see that background. Let's call on ellipsis press with a optional and call the function. And then let's do a little bit of quick formatting. Firstly, I want to make sure that this VStack is extending as long as possible. Because, for example, if I had really short titles here, I can actually see that the entire cell is not extending full width. So on the VStack, I'm just going to add a frame with a max width of infinity. Just to show that, let's add a background of color.blue so we can see it here. All right. And then, of course, within that blue, we want to align to the leading edge. Beautiful. Let's update our titles really quickly. Let's add in a lot of text, and let's add in a lot of text down here as well. See what that looks like. That looks like way too much. So on both of these, let's give it a line limit of maybe 2. And that looks much better. I'm going to set this back now to some artist name, so we get some default text as well as some title goes here. Beautiful. All right. And I think if I actually look at this, these images are a little bit smaller than what we have. So maybe they'll give us a default of 50 as the image size. And that looks a little bit better. Let's get rid of the blue background. I think we have our cell set up and ready to go. Let's jump back into the Spotify playlist view. Let's put some of these on the screen here. So what we're going to do on this screen is actually, again, load an array of products. So we're going to create an up here. We'll do @state private var products of type array of product. I'm going to set it equal to a blank array. I'm going to go to my Spotify home view, where in the home view, we added a quick get data function where we downloaded some products. I'm just going to copy that function quick, jump back to my Spotify playlist view. Let's below the view. So here's the body. I will double click to get to the end of the body. Down here, let's paste in our get data function. We don't need the current user part. We don't have product rows on this screen, and we don't need to prefix it by 8. So let's just get the get products part of this function. Paste it here. And then on the Z stack, we're just going to add a quick task. And we'll say await, get data. While we're here, let's also just call it toolbar.visibility hidden for the nav bar, because we know we don't want the native nav bar ever to show on the screen. All right, so we got this array of products that are now loading onto the screen. The reason that I'm adding another fetch request here, because we could pass the data from the home view when we click the button. We could pass the selected product as well as all of the products. But this is kind of just mimicking an actual real world app. Because in a real world app, you would get the preview here. You would get like a song name. You would click onto it. Then you would go to the playlist view. And then when you get to this screen, Spotify probably has some function that says, get all the songs in this album or get all the songs in this playlist. And then they would all load. And so when you get this, get all the songs, that would be this function here. We're just using products for some mock data. All right, after the description cell, obviously we want to put these on the screen. So let's do a for each. We'll do for each products. This will be for each product in this closure. And we're going to put on a song row cell. I'm going to hold the Option button and click enter to get the completion here. Triple click, Control M to format it. Image size, let's use the default, which I think is 100. Let's go with the default 100. Image name, I'm going to call the product.firstImage. The title, let's do product.title. The subtitle, let's do product.subtitle. Or there is no subtitle, let's do maybe brand name for now, just as some fake text. On cell pressed, let's just create a function. We're going to fill in that later. And then on ellipsis pressed, we're not going to do anything right now. Let's just create a function here as well. All right, these are loading on the screen. Sorry, this should not be 100. Let's go down to 50. Looking a little bit better. On each of these, let's push them out from the edge. So maybe the horizontal padding on each cell. And that looks a little bit better. Cool. We got our cells rocking and rolling here. I think this looks really good. Actually, the ellipsis is too far over now. Let's make that padding just leading. So it's just on the left edge and the ellipsis is closer to the edge of the device. Remember, we got that nice tap area on the ellipsis, so that's why there's a little bit of spacing here anyway, which is going to be great for the user experience. And the last thing we're going to do in this video is actually work on the header. So if I look at the simulator here, firstly, I have a back button. And then as the user scrolls up, we bring in a fake nav bar header that matches the background. So it's a nice, really UI effect. This is not exactly what Spotify has in their app, but this is a very close SwiftUI solution that we're going to build out now. So first and foremost, the way to approach this, I'm going to build the header as if it doesn't animate. Let's just build it so that it's always on the screen first. And then we're going to work on the animation and the scroll view offset and deal with that. So firstly, let's get a header on the screen here. I'm going to jump back into my code. When I zoom out, I can see here this entire Z stack is just background layer. We have a scroll view layer, which is the foreground layer, and then that's it. And so after that, being that we're in a Z stack already, let's just add in the header layer. So I'm going to change this up in a bit, but let's just start with a simple rectangle and let's give it a fill of color.blue, just so that we can see it. I'll give it a frame with a height of maybe 100. Cool. All right. So on the header, whatever the header is going to be, I want to make sure that it pushes to the top. So you could put it in a V stack, but more efficient than that is just make another max frame on the outside of it. We'll use a max height of infinity. So now we can see, I'll show you guys that max height. If I put a background of color.red, we can see that the frame is now the full height of the screen. Let's align it to the top of that frame. Go top here. Cool. Get rid of the red. And now we have our header up at the top of the screen. That's where we want it. Let's build out the header really quickly. And when we look at it in the preview here, there's a button on the left and then there's a title. Now, as a SwiftUI developer, I know that if I will put this button and this title in an H stack, it's going to be lopsided, right? Because one button, one item, if I put these both at max width, the title is not going to be in the center, right? I could put a button here and a button on the right side and then put the title right in the center, and that would work. But in this scenario, what's actually a little bit easier is I'm going to put these in a Z stack, and so that they're not actually in an H stack, so that the frame of this is independent of the frame of this, and this way the title stays in the center. So what we're going to do here is actually, let's create a Z stack, and then let's put the title on the screen first. We're going to say text with the product.title. Let's give this font of headline. I'm going to get rid of my rectangle and maybe add just a background of color.blue to the Z stack for now. All right. Font of headline, let's do foreground style of .spotify white because we want the white text. We want to add some padding around this title. So let's go padding of maybe vertical. Let's go 16 or maybe closer to 20 actually. Make it a little bit bigger. Let's give this text a frame with a max width of infinity as well. So it's pushing all the way to the sides. let's actually cut the frame here and put it on the Z stack so the entire object is fully pushed to the sides. Next to this, we're also going to add an image for the back button here. So let's build out the back button quickly. If I look at it, it looks like it is a chevron icon with a circle behind it. And then when it moves up, we can't see the circle behind it anymore. Let's build that out really quickly. We're going to add an image here with a system name of chevron.left. I think it has to be lowercase. You can see it just barely coming up on my screen here. We're going to give this a foreground style of .spotify white as well. I've now used Spotify white on both of these, so I'll just put this on the Z stack instead. Let's give this a font of title 3, make it a little bit bigger, give it some padding, maybe 10. Now that I have the padding, I will put a background on it. Let's put the background as color.spotify gray, and we'll call opacity 0.7. So there's a little bit of see-through in there. We can see the button coming through here. I want to make that a circle, so we'll give it a clip shape of a circle. And then we're going to add a .tap gesture when the user clicks the back button. All right, obviously we want this on the left side of the screen. What I'm going to do on the frame of the image, let's just give it a frame with a max width of infinity and alignment of leading. So it pushes to the left edge. Before we actually do that, let's add some padding on the leading edge to push it off the left edge by 16. So I got my button here. I got the button working here. A couple things to clean up before we move forward here. Firstly, let's get rid of the frame, the height of 100 here. I want to make sure that this frame can be a little bit flexible so that it can extend to the safe area. So if I delete this fixed height, I think it will ignore the safe area, which looks a little bit better. It's ignoring the safe area because we're pushed to the top of the screen and then there's a background on the object. So this looks a little bit better. And now let's look at the two styles that we have here. Firstly, there's some state that we need to manage for if we're showing the header, right? So right now we're not showing the header, and then down here, we're showing the header. So there's two states. Let's create up here an @state private var. Let's call it show header of type bool. Set it equal to false for a second. And let's add a little bit of a code in here. So if I look at my header section, which is this code here, what do I know? Well, firstly, I know that I want to animate the opacity. So if it is show header, let's do opacity. We'll say if show header is true, then we want the title and the background, this blue area, to appear. So we'll give it a 1, otherwise 0. So right now, show header is false. So the top section should not be showing. It should be the default state that we have at the top. So I'm looking at my background color here, and I really want that background color only apply on when the text is showing. So I'm going to move it into past this opacity here. Let's try to switch it. Let's make show header now to true and see what that looks like. That looks good with the blue background, but when this blue background has appeared, I don't need the background on this icon anymore. So for the background here where we have the Spotify gray, let's add an ternary operator. If show header is true, let's just make the background color.black.opacity of 0.001. Otherwise, we'll give it the Spotify gray. So now it just blends in with the background, which makes it a little bit better. I'm again using black opacity 1 so that we can't see it, but it is still tappable. So now I have my two states that are looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and I'm going to keep this blue while we work on this a little bit more. But the next thing we need to do is actually understand the offset of the scroll view. And there are ways to do that in SwiftUI. There are several ways. What we really want to do is add a geometry reader to the top cell in the scroll view. So if I were to just take out the header for a second, let's just comment out the header. If I look at this top cell, I know this top cell is all the way at the top of the screen, right? The offset is basically 0 at the very beginning. And so as I scroll, the scroll view offset will be the same as the offset of the topmost cell. So one hack basically is to wrap the top cell in a geometry reader. You can add a geometry reader here and then put your cell inside. And now on change of the geometry, you can perform some action. Now I've talked a little bit about this in a previous video on my channel. I covered the import SwiftUI framework. And in that, I've added a couple modifiers to basically, instead of wrapping the content in a geometry reader and then observing the change of the geometry, it's often better to put a background on it and then put some text and wrap this background layer in the geometry reader. So if I put this here and I give this a frame with a max width of infinity and a max height of infinity, this background layer is going to have essentially the same frame as this header cell without affecting the actual frame of the header cell. So again, if I do the original version here, we can see that when I wrap it, the actual frame of the content kind of changes. That's because the geometry reader has some kind of funky properties to it. And so usually I just put a background and then wrap the background in a geometry reader. And so this way the background has the same frame, which if I make this an overlay and I add a dot background to this color.red, we can see that the background, it has the same frame as the actual cell. So the reason I'm telling you guys this is because I actually have a modifier in the SwiftUI framework called .readingFrame. And it does exactly what I just explained. You guys can jump in here and look at the code. It's literally a background adding a text with a max frame and then observing the change of the geometry. So we're going to read the frame of the cell, and then we're going to determine when to show the header or not. So when I do this, oftentimes it's kind of hard to know what the frame is going to be. So I'm going to start by just creating a state private var. Let's call this offset of type CG float, set it equal to 0 for a second. And I'm just going to set the offset equal to the frame. Let's go the max Y. So the max Y is going to be the bottom of the cell. And what I'm going to do is actually below the scroll view, let's just put a text that says the actual offset. I'm just give it a background of color.red. All right, so I can see it up here. It's 309 right now. So when I scroll, it should move, and we can see that it's moving. And so this is going to help me just figure out, where do I actually want to trigger the show header. So I'm going to do this, and it looks somewhere in here. When it gets close to the top, maybe around here, looks like, let's do 150. That looks pretty good. That's when I want to trigger show header. So what I'm going to do is basically just say, we're going to say show header if the show header is equal to, if the frame.maxy is less than 150, then show header should be true. Otherwise, it should be false. Right? So if it's up here, if it's less than 150, we want to show the header. If it's less than 150, we want to show the header. If it's greater than 150, we want to hide the header. And so this, we can actually just write as this because it is equal to true and false as well. Let's put our header back on the screen here. Comment this out. All right, I'm going to scroll. It looks like we're about to hit 150 and then the header pops on the screen. So that looks much better already. That's exactly what we were going for. But delete this little offset text here. I actually don't even need the offset on the view. I'm just going to delete that as well. All right. All right, a couple more tweaks. Firstly, we want it to animate in, so it's not just a hard jump. So let's make sure we have some animation on this. So I'm going to add here maybe animation. Let's animate. I like the new smooth animation. It's very nice. Let's give it a duration of 0.2. So super quick. And then let's animate on change of show header. That should look a little bit better. Animates in a little bit. I also want to animate the offset so that it looks like it's coming in from the top a little bit, because right now it's just appearing, but I want it to appear that it's coming from the top area and sliding in a little bit. So what I'm going to do is actually let's add it here after the background. Let's add an offset. Let's give it a Y, and we'll say, if show header is true, obviously the offset we want to be 0, so it's in the current spot. But if it's false, let's offset it upwards so that it's up at the top of the screen here. So let's go negative, maybe, let's exaggerate it at the beginning. So negative 200. So the offset right now, it's way up here. And now when I scroll in, it should animate in a little bit, which looks better. And it looks like maybe the animation is a little too quick. So I'm going to change this to maybe negative 40 and see how that looks. And that looks a little bit more natural. Now the background, let's just make it Spotify black so it matches our actual background of the screen. And just like that, we have a really cool, awesome nav bar with some animation. And I think it looks really professional. All right, and we are basically done with building this screen. For the rest of this video, I'm just going to add some routing logic so that we can get from this first screen, we can actually click a button and go to the second screen. From the second screen, we can click the button and go back to the first screen. So again, if you're following along, I already imported the SwiftUI routing framework. This is a personal framework that I have on GitHub. You guys are welcome to use it. I've covered it in detail on my channel as well. I did a whole video on it. You guys don't have to use this in your apps, but I do believe that it is the easiest way to do routing in SwiftUI. We're gonna put into practice real quick. So firstly, in order to use the framework, we got to wrap our entire app in a router view. So I'm going to jump into the root of my app, the app.swift file. I'm going to import SwiftUI routing, and then let's just wrap the entire app in a router view. Click enter. We don't need this router, so I'll leave it as an underscore, and we'll just add the content view. So now my entire app is wrapped in a router view, meaning all of the navigation stuff is handled for me. I don't need to add any extra modifiers. We're going to jump into the content view, and we're just going to make the first screen in our app a very simple, let's do maybe a list. And we're just going to have some buttons here that just says like open Spotify. Just because we're going to have a bunch of screens. I'll take the padding off of here. We don't need this get data anymore, so let's delete this stuff. Open Spotify, and we want to just open up that screen. I'm going to pull the router out of the environment. We're going to go at environment /.router var router. And then we're just going to access the router. We're going to say show screen. Let's show it as a full screen cover so that it opens kind of full screen. And again, we don't need the router in this closure. And let's just go to the Spotify home view. Cool. If I click this, it's not working because the preview is not in a router view. So let's just wrap this in a router view. Beautiful. And now we have Spotify home screen loading up. Let's add a back button from this home screen just so we can get back to the content view. So if I click on, if I click on this user profile, it's just going to come back to our content view. And if I click on one of these buttons, we're going to push to the playlist view. Let's jump into the home view quickly. I'm actually going to copy the environment router here, paste it up here. So if I go to this button at the top left, let's find that. That's our header. Jump to the definition. Looks like we already have a tap gesture on it. Let's just call router.dismiss the screen if we want to go back to that content view. Down here, if I click on one of these, so let's see where that button is. That's going to be the recent cell. So in our recent section, we should have this cell here. We want to go to the next screen, and I'm going to reuse that same action if I click on this cell down here. So what I'm going to do is create a function here. Let's go a private func. We'll say go to playlist view, make it a function, open the brackets. And when we click on one of these, we're going to pass in the product that we click on. So here we'll call product of type product. And then we're going to access the router, and we're going to say show screen, or let's push. So it's a regular navigation link. And we don't need the returned router. And we're just going to say, let's go to the Spotify playlist view. Let's pass in the product. Let's also pass in a user. So it looks like we have the user should be loaded on the screen up here, the user. So we're just going to add a quick, for our sake, we'll do a guard let current user else return. We know there's going to be a user, and we'll just pass it in here. This looks like it's white, so it's not really compiling, and that's because we have not import SwiftUI routing. Cool. All right. So now we just got to call go to playlist view. Let's do it from my recent section. If I click on one of these, let's pass in the product that we're clicking on. All right. Let's make sure it works. I'm going to go to my preview, wrap that in a router view as well. And hopefully if I click it, it pushes. That's beautiful. We don't have a back button set up here. So let's restart the preview quickly. Let's make sure that when I click on the Huawei here, it actually opens up the Huawei image. Beautiful. Down here at the bottom, when I click on these cells, so it's the image title row cell, let's also call the playlist, go to playlist view. Let's pass in the product we're clicking on. And then also when I click on this cell here, remember we have a couple actions. We have on add to playlist press if they click this button. But if they click on the general cell, let's just go to playlist view with the product. Make sure this one works. Beautiful. Let's restart it again. Let's make sure these bottom ones work. Beautiful. Let's restart it again. Let's do one more check. Come down here. Maybe I'll click on the Samsung Universe 9. Looks like that worked as well. Beautiful. The screen's looking great. Now let's jump into this final screen here. And what I'm going to do is if I click on this back button, obviously I want to go back. But one thing I'm also noticing is that I'm trying to swipe back and the swipe back is not working as well. So I want to make sure I add the swipe back to work as well as clicking on the back button here. Let's jump into the playlist view. Let's also import SwiftUI routing. Let's add in our @environment router, var router. On the back button, where's the back button? It's in our header somewhere. Where's our header? It's a little confusing. I'm actually going to cut this and let's come down here and make this a private var header. Type some view. Clean up the code a little bit. I'll keep the header here and I'll keep the frame of max height outside of the header just so that I can very easily understand how it's laying out. On the image on the left, let's dismiss the screen. We'll call router.dismiss screen. That should work. And just for kicks, if we click on one of these products, let's even push further to the next screen. So if I go back to the Spotify home view, this go to playlist view, I'm just going to copy that and paste it in the song view. We don't have current user, but we do have a user on this screen. So let's just pass in the user. And then when we click on these cells, which are in the song row cell on cell press, let's just go to playlist view again, pass in the product. So hopefully now if I click on one of these, all right, let's put our preview inside a router view. If I click on one of these, hopefully it now pushes even further to the next screen, which it looks like it is not. So what are we doing wrong? On cell pressed, let's jump into the song row quickly. On cell pressed is never being called. All right, so let's give the entire thing, let's give it, we don't need a foreground style. Let's give it a background of color.blue so that we can see what we're working with. Cool. I think that whole thing will add a tap gesture and we'll call on cell pressed. Make color.black, opacity 001. Back to our screen, click and it pushes. I click the back button, it dismisses as well. So now we can infinitely push forward in our little mock screen. Let's build it to the simulator. I'm gonna click play here. All right, I got my content view loading. Let's open up Spotify. We got our Spotify home view loaded. This looks really nice. These are all scrolling. Make sure they're scrolling all the way through the edges of the device. And then we can click on these. We can click on the user profile to go back. We can open up Spotify. We can go forward to the iPhone X. We can go back. And this is looking pretty good. I am noticing that as I go back, these are changing every time. And that's because in our home view, our Spotify home view, we're using these task modifiers. So task. And using a task, if you're using asynchronous code, is better than doing on appear and creating a task. Because the task has a slightly different life cycle than on appear. But the problem is that we don't really need to get the data if we already have the data. So I'm just going to say here, if the products is successful, meaning this succeeded and this succeeded, then we don't need to fetch it again. So let's just do a guard products.isEmpty, else return. So let's just make sure that the array of products is already empty, because if it's not empty, that means it already succeeded and loaded some products. So build that to the simulator quickly. So we'll open up Spotify. Let's push forward and I push back. Hopefully this doesn't change anymore and it's the same rows every time. A little bit cleaner, saving ourselves a little extra fetch request. Let's come back in here, click on one of these. Let's push forward again, push forward again. It looks like we have this infinitely nested Spotify home view, which looks great. The last thing I'm noticing is that I can't actually swipe left. And that's because by default, the SwiftUI modifiers don't allow the swipe left gesture. I do not really know why that is the case. But if you just Google it, I just Google enable swipe back gesture in SwiftUI. You get a nice Stack Overflow post. It's nothing new if you've been building SwiftUI apps. basically just need to add this extension. So I'm going to copy it. And it's literally just an extension of the navigation controller, which is basically the navigation stack, and allowing the gesture of swiping back the interactive pop gesture recognizer. I'm just going to come back to my app here, go into my app.swift file. I'm just going to paste it down here. Build and run one more time. Open up Spotify, click forward, and now I should be able to swipe back interactively. Right. This is a much better user experience for our users. And I'm really liking this. I hope you guys are as well. I mean, we got a custom nav bar at the top here. It looks beautiful. It's animating. We got stretchy headers here. We can infinitely push to more screens. We can go backwards. We got our home view set up with some animations. We got the different cells with different types of data on them. And overall, I think this looks really good. Before we wrap up, I just want to quickly talk about architecture because it's obviously a huge subject in the iOS community, in any mobile app community, and it's important to think about. And I want you guys to recognize at a high level how we built our screens here. And the main thing that I'm pointing out is that I've built these two core screens and everything else is a reusable component. And so when I build all of these components, none of these components have references to data sources or dependencies or even specific data types. These are all generic reusable components. And that means anytime I'm actually going to deal with the data flow, like actual holding the state of the data or loading the data asynchronously, all of that is being done actually in the core view itself, not in the reusable component. So all of my state is just in this one screen. All of my state is in this one struct here. So if you were just building this on your own, you might have different @state variables within some of these components. But then it gets really hard to manage the data flow because if you're holding state maybe in one of these child sections, but not at the parent level, then it's hard to share it with the other sections and things like that. So I really like to basically just create reusable components and hold the state in the view struct itself. And the cool part about this is be very easy if I wanted to switch this into MVVM. I know a lot of people are pushing MVVM, a lot of people are against MVVM. I do still think MVVM is incredibly important in SwiftUI. It will remain important in mobile app architecture. But the point here is that we can use this same setup whether or not we're using MVVM, MV, TCA, Viper. It all derives from the same root here. We have a view that has state. And if I want to convert this to MVVM, all I need to do is create a view model and move all of this into my view model. So if you have basically environment objects, if you have @state, they'll become @publish. Environment will just be injected into the view model. Just to show you guys that quickly before we wrap up, if I created a final class, let's call it Spotify Home View Model, and I will open the brackets. Let's make this an @observable. If I made my view model in my class here, @state var, let's call it view model, and I'll make it of type Spotify Home View Model. And then basically, instead of having all of this in the view, I would have all of this in the view model. So when I create my view model, I would pass in a router. So I'll say, let's create up here a router of type router, of type any router. And let's pass in, we actually don't even pass in any data to this view. So if I just copy this and paste it all in here, I can just get rid of the @state because we know the observable is already managing the state of this. I'm going to create a quick initializer here. I'll just pass in the router. Now when I create this Spotify Home View in the preview, we just got to pass in a Spotify Home View router, which accepts a router. So in this closure, I already have the router and I'll just pass it in here. Same thing when I call it from my app, I'll just pass in the Spotify Home View model and I'll pass in the router, which we're going to get from this closure here. Just like that, I can build and run. I now have a view model for the home view. It took me 4 seconds to add. We're not using it. I haven't actually changed all of the code, but all we would have to do is instead of accessing these directly, we can start to access the view model.products. And realistically, what I would do is take all of my functions that reference things in the view model and just make that an action inside the view model. So I'll do something like this. I will delete. Now we're just going to access the data in here. We'll make it public so that our screen will just call viewModel.getData. And we'll basically just go through and move all of the things, the references that are reliant on the view model into view model functions. So this would be viewModel.products. I'm going to undo all of this and just hold the Command Z to undo all of the view model work, because this series is not about creating architecture. It is about just setting up the screens. But I just wanted to show you guys that that was super easy to kind of refactor my code. If I wanted to go from no architecture or just SwiftUI views, or you might call this MV, to MVVM or TCA, it is very, very simple. It's the same structure that all I need to do is move some of this into another layer and call it a view model. So if you're setting up your views the right way, it doesn't really matter which architecture you use, because your views are already set up to be scalable, to be reusable, and super flexible for different architectures. Anyway, that is it for Spotify for now. And we're going to move on to building some other screens in some other apps. If you guys really liked this one, I would love to hear your comments below. And if you want me to actually continue building the Spotify app, leave some comments and like this video. And there's a chance in the future I'll come back and add more screens to our Spotify app. But for right now, I think this covers the bulk of it. And we're going to move on to some other screens that are just as cool, if not maybe even cooler than this one. So I'm super excited. Thank you all for watching. As always, my name is Nick. This is Swiftful Thinking, and I'll see you in the next video.